Hey there, and welcome to Branded by Amazing. This is episode number 20, and today we're going to talk about what it means that billions and billions of dollars have flooded into the Amazon marketplace by big aggregators. This is Matt Clark, the CEO of Amazing.
I'm Mike McCleary, the Chief Product Officer of Amazing.
So kind of tying into this, kind of want to kick this off with a little bit of news, is that according to an article on Marketplace Pulse, I think they said, and this was about a month ago, they basically said that to date, about $7 billion has been raised in 2021 alone by these big aggregators, which are just big companies, big funds out there that are buying Amazon, primarily businesses all over the place. And they said that if this continues at this pace, then basically there'll be $10 billion raised in 2021 to buy these kinds of businesses, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, this did not exist even a handful of years ago. And especially not when we were getting started, when we were teaching people how to get started, this was not a thing. And so we want to talk about it today. What exactly is happening now? How did it start? And where is it going?
You know, one story I know that you and I personally have seen, we had lunch one time with somebody who started this up. I believe it was an Austin-based company that kind of was at the forefront of trying to buy all these businesses, right?
Yeah. So years ago, there's a company called, years ago, it wasn't really that long ago, but in this space, it seems like a while ago, but it's called 101 Commerce. And they had raised, I think, something like $12 million or something to buy Amazon-focused businesses. And they were going to, kind of like a lot of these other people, I guess the general plan was you buy a bunch of these businesses at, say 4 times profit. And then you put them all together, and then now because it's a bigger company, less risk, then now maybe it's valued at 8 times profit, 10 times profit. Maybe they get some economies of scale, and they're able to kind of reduce some operational costs and that kind of thing, and then basically flip this thing and sell it for a lot more money. That was the general plan. And I can't remember if I'm talking with the guy that was running it. I think he said they wanted to sell it for, $100 million, hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't really remember. And so that kind of, to my knowledge, was the first big public example of this thing happening. And then it seems like after a few years, they couldn't get more money from investors for whatever reason, and they basically ended up having to sell this thing to another company that still kind of exists today. So that started, but then along the way, big companies out there with a big pocketbooks, companies like Thrasio started coming and raising. I think it started with hundreds of millions of dollars, and now they've raised alone, I think, into the billions of dollars.
$2 billion now, the last time we checked.
Yeah, so then there's all this money where basically these people are buying the same kind of businesses that have always just been sitting there. And before, it was, typically like, somebody else that wanted to get in the online business space. They would go through a broker, which we've worked with for years, and they would go and buy one of these businesses from one of our members or another Amazon seller and say, okay, I'll give you, 3 to 4 times annual profit. And they individually would buy one of these businesses, and then they would go out there and try to grow it and sell it. New business for them, maybe a new source of income, whatever the reason for doing that was. But now there's these massive companies who are buying these things, keeping them in-house, and I think their end game is to try to sell all these things, but they're getting so big that I don't know if that's still likely or if they just want to keep trying to go bigger and bigger and bigger and maybe eventually take their companies public, which is probably on the radar for a company like Thrasio. But I don't really know what it ends up looking like for a company like that I think they've acquired like a couple hundred brands so far. And if they keep at this pace, I don't see why they wouldn't end up being, like 1,000 brands they've acquired, 1,000 like relatively small brands, anywhere from, $1 million or $2 million a year in sales to maybe 5 to 10 million. And I'm sure they have some outliers that are doing more than that, but I think that's kind of their sweet spot. And so we're trying to figure out what does that actually look like now all this has changed.
And you kind of outlined the main difference is back when we first heard of businesses buying other Amazon-based businesses, it was more of a broker matching up the right Amazon business with the right buyer who was someone wanting to get into online business, maybe someone who had extra cash and they thought it might just be a good business to have on the side. And there was this matching process, and you had to have everything lined up where you had the right buyer and the right seller in order to really find a good way to sell your business. Mm-hmm. Now, the demand for these businesses has skyrocketed. You have companies like Thrasio, Perch, Razor Group, Elevate Brands, all these businesses out there with lots of cash that there's no real matching up. They just have money that they need to spend. Still have to have all the right criteria, but they're now willing to buy all these brands. So really, I guess one of the things that's already happening, it's much easier now to sell your business because of all the increased demand on the buying side of it.
Yeah. So that was kind of one of the first things we want to get into is what is already happening because of this. And like you just said, it's getting easier to sell these kind of businesses because there's so many people looking for them. And also, what we've kind of experienced is that people that sell to these companies, it's It's a lot smoother of a process because it's like you're selling to the person that is the buyer rather than going through a broker who has this whole trust issue they have to kind of mitigate between the person who's buying it and the person who's selling it. It's like you're just talking to the people directly and they have the money. And so they typically aren't going out there and getting more loans or anything like that. So there's not like an SBA loan process. Like they either buy the thing or they don't. So the closing process very quick. You get the cash. The process is a lot simpler from what we've heard.
And it's very methodical. I mean, they have the exact list of what they're looking for as far as what type of businesses. And then they have their exact list of what you need to provide them as far as, like documentation. And then they have another list of all the steps they need to go to actually run through that final process. Like, what do you do at the very end? Do you sell, do you turn the seller account over to them? Do they just buy the brands? They have this all down, Pat, where before, even buying businesses before brokers, it was kind of you didn't know what was going to happen. You had to figure that out at the time.
Yeah. So, what we've seen, I know you were talking with one of our members that recently, I think in the last few months, sold her business for millions of dollars to Thrasio. Mm-hmm. And you said that when you talked to her, they basically almost immediately tripled her sales or something crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things that they do is they're very good at, say optimizing. I guess they have a really good playbook for Amazon paid ads. And so they're immediately increasing spend on paid ads, but doing it in an efficient way. And so we're seeing this across the board is that Amazon PPC costs are increasing, partially because I think deeper people with deeper pockets, more better funded people like these are dumping more money into Amazon PPC. It's also just becoming a more sophisticated sort of seasoned platform. Yeah. Like you saw it over time with Google and Facebook. Costs tend to increase over time as more and more people keep using them. Amazon PPC was very new 5 years ago. Now it's not. And so that's probably a reason, but I think it's also with these aggregators.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can't deny what we don't know that for a fact. You can't deny when aggregators come in and they want to immediately grow sales. The biggest lever they have is to spend more money on advertising. Mm-hmm. And when they go in there and start doing that, they're going to drive costs up. It's an auction marketplace, just like Facebook ads, just like Google ads. It's on auction. Whoever's willing to bid the more, a few other factors, but pretty much if you're willing to bid more in order to get market share, which they need, costs are going to rise.
Yeah. So those are kind of a few of the things that we see are already happening. And then a few of the other ones that are a little more speculative, but we're kind of trying to work our way up to predicting the future here, which obviously is not easy. But one of the things that we think is also happening because of this is just more competition. I mean, you have to imagine that if there's more sophisticated companies out there than your average person who's built an Amazon brand in their first time, and they aggressively want to grow their businesses, they're going to be pushing harder for organic rankings, pushing harder on ads, doing better listings, doing all those kind of things that you should be doing. So it does seem to be increasing competition in that respect.
Yeah, so in addition just to the PPC we're talking about, I believe there's a checklist, and I heard someone talk about on a Thrasio, another podcast, a checklist of 100 different things that as soon as they acquire a business, that they go in and start optimizing on these listings. So, in addition to adding money to it for spend, they're going to go through and make sure all the images, one thing, more simple thing, all the images take up as much of the white space as possible. That's one thing they do on every listing. Then they're going to review the titles, the bullets, the descriptions, add in enhanced brand content. All these things that are making every single product that they acquire optimized to the highest level possible so that they can get as much market share as possible.
Yeah. And so kind of related to this, it's making other people who are still running their own individual businesses have to operate at a higher level. It's like you can't be just getting lucky and then, not really optimizing your descriptions or your title or ranking for keywords and all that kind of stuff. It's like you almost have to do all that stuff if you want to compete because you're competing against other people who that's just part of their playbook. And so you have to operate at their level if you're going to be successful.
And at the same along the same lines as well, you want to not only be able to compete with the bigger aggregators out there, if you're also looking to sell your business to the aggregators, you're going to be more aware of your costs, your profits, everything. It's really turning some small mom and pops into more seasoned business owners to make sure they're running their business like a business if your end goal is to sell to one of these big companies.
Yeah. And then we know from talking with them is that they are looking to take these brands outside of Amazon. So Amazon is great. And so if they're buying a brand that's already doing well, they're going to try to maximize that. But because they've raised so much money, they have to keep growing to make their shareholders happy, because I'm sure that's the promise they made to them whenever they raise the money. And so they have to look for more growth for these brands rather than just kind of maintaining what they're doing. So they'll maximize on Amazon, but they're also pushing these brands outside of Amazon onto Shopify, into retail. And so they're starting to affect that market, or will start affecting that market also.
Yeah, and I know that was definitely surprising to you and I. And we heard that earlier in the year. We were talking to one of them out there saying that they're now looking to those channels because I guess it makes sense. If you've maxed them or felt you've kind of maxed out your traffic and conversions on one platform, you only have outwards to go. You got to go wider finally. And they definitely have the funds, the teams, the processes to do that.
One part that I don't know if you've talked to anybody is, when they buy an Amazon focused brand, like, yeah, they want to maximize sales for those products. They want to push outside of Amazon. But have you seen or heard them pushing much to add more products to those brands?
Not yet. What I've heard so far is they don't. It's like, so they're not really brand focused. Like we used to always think that these aggregators were going to be brand focused. They wanted you to build a big brand with lots of products. They just want to own the market for that product. And so they're not going to go out there and waste their own time and money trying to build another product, because that's why they're buying these other brands and products, letting those people spend their money, grow the brand so that they can come in and buy it once it's already up there. So I have not heard them yet launching any new products.
Yeah, super interesting. So then kind of like projecting into the future, it's kind of, that's the situation now. Those are a few things that are kind of in place, but what's going to happen in the future? This is where we're kind of speculating. I mean, what happens at the point where a company like Thrasio, and there's a lot of other ones, but they're kind of, I think, the biggest one, and so that's the one we talk about the most. There's other ones that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, which is still a ton of money. It's just they seem to be the biggest. And so what happens when nobody wants to buy their portfolio or a similar portfolio, where they have all these random kind of smaller businesses or smaller products that are doing well, and they're producing, like, in total, a lot of sales. But what happens if nobody wants to buy that portfolio? It's like, what are they going to do if they're just sort of sitting there stuck with this collection of thousands of random Amazon products? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to very quickly go from either a business that's, buying up brands to one that's operating and running brands. I know they already have that in place. They have teams in place to run these brands because they can't afford to have them lose sales, lose market share. They have to keep them going and growing, they said. But I don't think their long-term play was to continue managing all these portfolios of thousands of products. They have to pretty quickly switch over to that model, or one thing I think we had mentioned is maybe they end up selling back some of these businesses to other people again, who are looking to for a smaller brand, because if no one's willing to spend billions and billions of dollars to buy these brands, maybe other people want to spend millions of dollars though to get into the game.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of very smart people there, but it seems very hard to manage so many different brands that are very small. It's like you take a company like Procter and Gamble, like they're managing brands that are like Tide, which is $1 billion plus brand. It's got however many products under Tide. I'm sure there's lots of them, but it's $1 billion brand. It's not a $3 million a year Amazon sort of company. And so it's like, but because they're all under different brands, they're not together. That means they have to manage all that stuff separately. It's likely a different even email address somebody emails if they ever want to contact that brand, a different website they have to manage, a different social media profile. All that stuff is different for every single brand. I mean, think about it. If you just want to make that brand a little better, you got to go out there and do a set of brand guidelines, for example, which we've been through before. I've done it with 2 businesses, and it's just one of those little small things. Now they're doing that for 1,000 different brands that none of them individually really add up to that much. I mean, maybe 1% do, are more significant, say, $20-30 million a year plus. That seems like a nightmare, trying to manage that many small brands.
And one of the things we never knew back when people were starting to buy Amazon businesses were, do they buy the entire account, the seller account, or do they simply buy the brand and move that product over into an existing account? To me, if they were able to combine all these products and brands into maybe a handful of existing Amazon seller accounts, it's more manageable. Less people have to go into less accounts, log in all these different passwords, and they can manage that. But it's still a very logistical nightmare to go in and manage several accounts. But that's what they're doing. They're not moving them into just a handful of accounts. They're buying, not only the brands, they're buying individual accounts. So they have thousands of brands, each on their own individual Amazon seller account to manage as well. I mean, the only way you can do it is they must have software, I'm assuming. And we know that they're involved in software. But yeah, that, like you said, what a logistical nightmare to try to manage and grow those brands when you have all these different businesses set up.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wonder too is right now it seems like Amazon is very kind of keyword focused, like product centric, which I think is why their model is to go out there and buy these products that have, what they call a review moat, but basically more good reviews by a long margin than any competitors. It's like you see this all the time in some products. Like there'll be one product that has like 10,000 reviews, and the next best, say 3 competitors all have like maybe 1,000. And then so they want that product with 10,000 because that gives them the most sustainable advantage on that product. It's probably going to sell the best and sell the best for a long time. But I mean, Amazon keeps unlocking more and more features for brands. And so what happens if the market becomes more brand centric? So now they have, these hundreds of separate brands where at some point there may be a reason why it would be better to have the trust built in a single brand. So rather than just some random product on some random brand nobody's ever heard of, but with a lot of reviews, at some point it may be more important to have a brand people actually recognize, even if you have less reviews.
Right.
More trustworthy, more stable. I mean, Amazon's brand pages now look amazing. They look almost as good as like a regular website. You have all that flexibility in there. And so that's another thing that I wonder, because if that model kind of switches, which is part of the risk, is they're kind of at the mercy of Amazon. But if that model and value kind of switches, like that could be devastating to those companies.
You're right. And Amazon is absolutely becoming more brand focused. If anyone who's selling right now, they now dedicated an entire menu option just to all the different features that brands have. There's brand experiments, there's special brand ads like sponsored headlines, sponsored brands ads. There's ways to actually communicate with customers via email. One thing that brands can do is email customers now on Amazon. For those who don't know that, that's like a new feature that's tied into their posts feature. They've also released for brands. There's ways to go out there, and the only way to communicate with people who give you bad reviews through the brand feature inside there. So they're definitely becoming more brand centric, whereas these aggregators are brand agnostic.
Yeah.
And they're just looking at the total numbers, which, like I said, a lot of smart people there, I'm sure, are already thinking about this.
Yeah, so then kind of the last note that I see here on stuff that we talked about that may be happening in the future as a result of all this is growth on other marketplaces. So we've kind of talked about like what if things go really bad for them, but either way, they're going to be looking for ways to grow on Amazon, outside of Amazon, and part of that outside of Amazon is not just like Shopify and retail. Part of it's like, okay, where else can we get sales? One obvious one would be like the Walmart marketplace, which keeps growing, still a fraction of the size of Amazon. But it does keep growing, and it seems to be like the number of sellers on there is increasing like crazy. And so that's like another place where they could basically just take all of their products, if they're not already, and start porting them over to there or the next best marketplace. So it gives them a way to all of a sudden just kind of flood those markets with products, which is kind of interesting.
It's very interesting because it'd be funny if like these aggregators that are building the business on Amazon suddenly become a big reason why these other marketplaces grow, because they can drive the marketplace. And the aggregators have the top selling products or many of the top selling products on Amazon. So they get all the traffic. So if they're able to go out there and very quickly launch hundreds, if not thousands of products on another platform, there's a lot of traffic that will just naturally move from Amazon over to those other platforms. Or at least theoretically, that could be one of the things we see happening.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing too is like a lot of the businesses that have been built to serve the Amazon marketplace have been built with a need to have like a critical mass of products. Like any businesses that are going out there and helping products rank and stuff like that, they need a good chunk of products. I mean, think about even like a tool like Honey or some of these discount tools. If you can get a bunch of people in that tool promising them big discounts on Amazon products, then that's kind of how those things get started. And so it's interesting with Thrasio, they can almost do that themselves. If they wanted to create a massive list of buyers for Amazon products, they almost have enough products themselves to feed to those people, which puts them in an interesting spot. I mean, that's just one example, but depending on their business model, there's no reason why they can't be going out there creating their own services, their own software tools, their own marketplaces, all that kind of stuff. With their number of products and volume, it's got to be something that, I don't know if it'll work or not, but something they'll probably eventually start exploring.
People have asked us for a long time, hey, why don't you create a competitor for Amazon? Maybe Thrasio, the aggregators, can do that. They have all the products.
Yeah, it'd be a tough thing. So those are some of our thoughts. I mean, it's definitely changing the space, if nothing else. What's going to happen in the future? We've kind of given some of our thoughts. Would be curious to see what you think also. If you head over to Amazing.com/branded, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can ask us a question, give us a comment. But either way, these are some of our thoughts of what we think is going to happen in the marketplace. I mean, with this amount of volume and sales and attention going into this space, we know things are going to be changing a lot. But fortunately, for people building these kind of businesses, there still seems to be good opportunity. It's like, like we've kind of been saying, the competition has increased. There's no way to ignore that. You can't do the same limited number of things you used to be able to do 5 years ago and expect to succeed today on Amazon. However, if you're willing to play the game and do it right and do it well and stay focused, the upside is nearly unlimited. I mean, we've personally known people that have sold businesses for, up to $100 million, maybe over $100 million, selling the majority of their sales being only on Amazon.
Right.
Which is crazy. I mean, when we were getting started, if you did 50 grand a month, you were a huge success. And now that's nothing compared to the size of what's possible today. So more competition, but the upside is also way bigger. So definitely an interesting time to be involved in the space. But yeah, head over to Amazing.com/branded if you have any questions you want to ask us or any comments you have about this episode. We'd love to hear from you and hope to see you in the next episode.